The day I realized my children didn't see me as their mother anymore, but as their bank, I was standing in my own kitchen, holding a grocery receipt I hadn't planned to keep. I remember the paper trembling between my fingers, thin and loud in the quiet of the house. The clock above the stove ticked like it was counting something down. Not time, patience, love, maybe dignity. I had just put the bags down, my back aching in that familiar way it does when you've lifted too much for too long, and I stared at that receipt as if it might explain how I'd gotten here. Milk, eggs, fresh fruit, brand name cereal, the kind my youngest insists on even though he's 32 and claims he doesn't really eat breakfast. Paper towels, laundry detergent, and tucked at the bottom, bold and unapologetic, the total. Higher than it should have been. Again. I laughed softly to myself, the way you do when something hurts but you don't want to admit it yet. Well, I said out loud, to no one, at least they're eating. That was the lie I told myself for years. Back then, my life looked ordinary from the outside. A modest house I'd lived in for decades, a routine that kept me upright. Coffee at 6, the local radio murmuring voices I half listened to, sunlight creeping through the curtains like it was trying not to wake me. I was the kind of woman people described as steady, dependable, the one you call when things fall apart. I had raised my children mostly on my own after their father passed, too early, too suddenly. I learned how to stretch $1, how to make one chicken feed 4 people, how to smile through school meetings and night shifts and birthdays that came whether you were ready or not. Love, for me, had always looked like showing up, paying the bill, filling the fridge, making sure nobody felt the ground disappear under their feet. So when my oldest lost his job temporarily, it felt natural to help. When my daughter's rent went up and she cried on the phone, I told her not to worry. When my youngest said the couch in his apartment was destroying his back, I put it on my card. Furniture, groceries, utilities. Little emergencies that added up quietly, like water seeping into a wall. They were adults, yes, but they were still my children, and mothers don't keep score. At least that's what I believed. Sunday dinners became my anchor. I cooked the same meals they grew up with. Pot roast that fell apart under the fork, cornbread warm enough to steam, green beans cooked soft because that's how they liked them as kids. They'd come in late, phones in hand, voices already tired. They hugged me with one arm, ate quickly, talked about their lives in fragments. I listened. I always listened. Sometimes in the middle of it all, I'd notice how they talked over me, how decisions were discussed around me, not with me, plans made, holidays arranged, inside jokes I wasn't part of. I told myself it was nothing. Children grow up, lives get busy. Don't be sensitive. The first time I felt that small, sharp doubt, the kind that pricks before it wounds, was at my grandson's birthday party. It was held at a rented hall across town, balloons bright and loud, music echoing off the walls. I arrived early, gift in hand, heart full. But as people filtered in, I noticed something strange. No one introduced me. I stood near the cake table, smiling politely as friends and in-laws chatted. My daughter was busy, moving fast, clipboard in hand like a manager on opening night. My son nodded at me from across the room, distracted. When someone asked, "And how do you know the family?" my daughter hesitated, just a second too long, before saying, "Oh, she helps out a lot." Helps out. The word landed heavier than it should have. I told myself not to read into it. I clapped when the candles were blown out. I cleaned up spilled juice. I left early, slipping my coat on quietly so no one would feel obligated to stop me. Driving home, the radio felt too loud. I turned it off and listened to the hum of the road instead. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment, the pause, the word, the way it made me feel like a convenience, not a cornerstone. Still, I kept paying, kept helping, because love, I told myself, is patient. Then came the invitation, or rather, the absence of one. I found out by accident the way truths often reveal themselves when you're not looking for them. A social media post from a distant cousin, a smiling group photo, my children, their partners, a celebratory dinner I knew nothing about. The caption read, "Family night, so grateful for these people." I sat at my kitchen table, phone in hand, the glow lighting up the lines in my skin. The clock ticked. The kettle screamed itself empty on the stove before I realized I'd forgotten it. Family night. I scrolled through the photos slowly, zoomed in on familiar faces, plates of food I hadn't cooked, laughter I hadn't heard. Something cold settled in my chest. Not anger yet. Something quieter, heavier. That night, as I folded laundry that wasn't mine and stacked receipts I pretended not to notice, a question finally rose to the surface, clear and unavoidable. When did I become the obstacle instead of the mother? I didn't know then that this question would change everything, that the bank they thought would never close was already counting its last days, that love, when mistaken for obligation, eventually demands a reckoning. I just sat there, alone at my table, listening to the clock count down whatever was left. I wish I could tell you that the feeling passed, that I slept it off and woke up lighter. But the truth is, once a doubt settles into your bones, it doesn't leave quietly. It shifts when you move. It aches when you bend. And every kindness after that starts to feel like a test you're failing without knowing the rules. The next morning, I made coffee and stood at the sink, watching steam curl toward the ceiling. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and yesterday's onions. Ordinary. Safe. I tried to anchor myself in that. I reminded myself that social media lies, that dinner plans fall together last minute, that no one means to hurt their mother. Still, I did something new. I opened the folder where I kept my bills. It wasn't dramatic, no music swelled, no realization hit me like lightning. I just started adding things up the way I always had, methodical, careful. Rent assistance for my daughter's apartment over 18 months, the security deposit I'd covered just for now, groceries every other week for my youngest, the couch, the mattress, the emergency dental bill, utilities I'd put in my name because someone's credit was being sorted. Tens of thousands of dollars sat there, on paper, quiet and undeniable. My phone buzzed. A text from my son. "Hey Mom, do you still have that card info saved? I need to grab a few things." I stared at the screen longer than necessary. My coffee had gone cold. I typed, erased, typed again. "What kind of things?" I wrote. The reply came fast. "Just basics. I'll send the receipt." Basics. That word again. I thought of the brand name cereal, the couch that hurt his back, the dinner I hadn't been invited to. "Okay," I typed back, because that's what I always did. Later that afternoon, my daughter stopped by unannounced. She breezed in like she owned the place, keys jingling, heels clicking against the floor I'd refinished myself years ago. She kissed my cheek, distracted, already talking. "Mom, I just need to grab the mail. And also, quick question, you wouldn't mind covering the Wi-Fi this month, right? Just until things settle." She said it lightly, the way you ask to borrow sugar. I nodded automatically, then paused. "Things settling," I said. "How long do you think that'll take?" She looked at me then, really looked, like she was surprised to find me standing there. Her smile tightened. "Why are you asking like that?" "I'm just asking," I said. My voice sounded calm to my own ears, but there was a carefulness to it now, like walking on ice. "I want to understand." She sighed, already impatient. "Mom, don't make this a thing. You know how hard it is right now." I did know. I always knew. Their versions of hard, at least. I nodded again. She took the mail and left without noticing that I hadn't answered. That evening, I sat at the table with my receipts spread out like a quiet confession. I realized something then. Not all at once, but piece by piece. They didn't ask how I was anymore. Not really. They didn't notice when I was tired, or when my hands shook a little from arthritis, or when I skipped my own doctor's appointment to cover someone else's expense. They noticed when the money slowed, when a question followed a yes. The first real clue, the one I couldn't smooth over, came a week later. I was supposed to meet my children for lunch, my idea. A small place downtown with chipped mugs and soup that tasted like someone's grandmother still worked the kitchen. I arrived early, as usual, chose a booth by the window. I ordered water and waited. And waited. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I checked my phone. No messages. I sent a light one. I'm here. A minute later, a reply came from my daughter. Oh shoot, we thought you were busy today. We already ate. We. Something about that pronoun caught in my throat. Already ate. No apology, no suggestion to come by anyway, just a closing of the door. I paid for my water and left. Outside, the air was sharp, the kind that wakes you up whether you want it to or not. I sat in my car and rested my forehead on the steering wheel. For a moment, I let myself feel it. Not the anger, not yet, but the sadness, the quiet grief of realizing you've been edited out of a story you helped write. That night, I didn't cook. I made toast and stood at the counter, crumbs on my fingers, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a group text. Plans for a weekend trip, lodging, splitting costs, laughing emojis. I wasn't included in the plans, but I was included in the expectation. My son wrote, Mom, do you mind putting the hotel on your card? We'll pay you back. I read it twice, 3 times. The words felt heavier now, stripped of their innocence. I imagined them together, deciding who would ask, assuming the answer. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the framed photos on the dresser, school pictures, graduations, moments I had been there for, camera in hand, heart full. I remembered the nights I'd stayed up worrying about them, the years I'd gone without so they wouldn't have to. And I asked myself a question I should have asked sooner. When did support become entitlement? I eventually typed back, I need to think about it. The typing bubble appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then appeared again. What's there to think about? My daughter wrote. I set the phone down without answering. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath for years and only just noticed. In the days that followed, the distance became clearer. Conversations cooled, replies shortened, invitations stopped altogether. But the requests, those kept coming, dressed up in familiarity, softened with love you at the end. I began to see the pattern. I had been useful, convenient, reliable, and now, inconveniently, I was asking questions. One afternoon, while sorting old paperwork, I found my will. I hadn't looked at it in years. I read through it slowly, noticing how generously I'd arranged everything. Equal shares, clear intentions, no conditions. I closed the folder and sat back. For the first time, the thought didn't scare me. What would happen if I stopped? The idea wasn't revenge, it wasn't punishment, it was something quieter, a boundary, a door closing not in anger, but in self-respect. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the living room in amber light, I made a decision. Not all of it, not yet, just the beginning. I would stop pretending nothing was wrong, and soon, very soon, I would find out whether my children loved me without the money attached. The first thing I noticed after I stopped saying yes was the silence. It didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, like dusk. A skipped good morning text, a delayed reply, a phone call that never came. I told myself it was coincidence, life gets busy, phones die, but deep down, I knew better. Silence, I was learning, can be louder than shouting when it's deliberate. The weekend trip came and went without another word. I saw the photos later, matching smiles, cocktails held up toward the camera, a view of the ocean I'd never been invited to see. I studied their faces the way a mother does, searching for signs, guilt, regrets, anything. But all I saw was ease. On Monday morning, my youngest called. "Hey, Mom," he said, voice casual, like he was calling to ask about the weather. So, about rent, the landlord's being a pain again. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the kitchen counter. The surface was cool through my sweater. What about it? I asked. Well, he wants it by Friday. I'm a little short. A little. Always a little. I could almost hear him shrugging on the other end. How short? I asked. There was a pause. Papers rustled. About $800? $800. I pictured the receipt folder, the neat columns, the quiet total growing month after month. I can't do that right now, I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, like a new language. There was another pause, longer this time. What do you mean you can't? He asked. Not angry, confused, as if I'd said the sky was green. I mean, I'm not able to, I replied. I kept my voice steady. I've been helping for a long time. I need to take care of myself for a bit. He exhaled sharply. Wow, okay. That one word, wow, carried more weight than he probably intended. Disappointments, accusation, surprise that the ATM had finally displayed insufficient funds. Mom, he continued, his tone shifting, you know I'd do the same for you. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I thought of the lunches I'd eaten alone, the questions no one asked, the dinner I wasn't invited to. I hope you would, I said softly, but right now, this is what I can do. He didn't say goodbye. The line went dead. That evening, my daughter showed up again, this time without knocking. Her energy was different, tight, controlled, like a smile pulled too thin. Did you tell him no? She asked, standing in my doorway. Yes, I said. I didn't invite her in. She crossed her arms. Why? I studied her face, the woman she'd become. Capable, strong, so sure of herself, except, it seemed, when it came to standing on her own. Because I've been paying for things that aren't mine to carry anymore. And because I feel like I'm only welcome when I'm useful. Her eyes flashed. That's not fair. Then help me understand. Why wasn't I invited to your dinner last month? She blinked. What dinner? I didn't answer. I just looked at her. Oh, she said slowly. That. Yes, that. She shifted her weights, annoyed now. Mom, it wasn't a big deal. It was last minute. It didn't feel last minute when I saw the photos, I replied. She scoffed. Are you really going to hold that against us after everything? After everything. There it was. Not gratitude. A ledger. I'm not holding anything against anyone, I said. I'm just noticing how things are. She laughed, a short, humorless sound. So what, you're punishing us now? No, I said. I'm changing. She stared at me, searching my face like she might find the old version of me there, the one who apologized, who folded, who paid. When she didn't, her expression hardened. You're being dramatic. This is what family does. I shook my head slowly. Family also shows up without expecting a receipt. She left then, muttering something under her breath. I closed the door gently behind her and leaned against it, heart pounding. My hands were shaking now, not with fear, but something closer to relief. Over the next few weeks, the pattern sharpened. Requests came less often, but when they did, they were sharper, more desperate. The tone shifted from assumption to pressure. I really need this, Mom. You're the only one who can help. Don't do this to us. And when I didn't, the disappointment turned into something uglier. My son accused me of changing. My daughter said I was holding money over their heads. One evening, during a rare group call, my daughter's husband chimed in for the first time. I mean, if you have it, why not help? It's not like you're struggling. I felt something in me settle then, like a final piece clicking into place. You don't actually know whether I'm struggling, I said calmly, because you've never asked. The line went quiet. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed listening to the house, the soft creaks, the wind brushing the eaves. I thought about all the times I told myself, this is what love looks like, and I wondered how I'd let love erase me. The discovery came not with a shout, but with a letter. A bank statement arrived addressed to me, but with an unfamiliar account number. I opened it by mistake, thinking it was mine. It wasn't. It was a joint account, one my daughter had opened using my address. Automatic transfers, small amounts at first, then larger. Money moving without my knowledge. My hands went cold. I sat down at the table, the same one where I'd studied receipts weeks before. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was a line crossed quietly, confidently, because they hadn't believed I'd ever look. For a long moment, I just sat there, the paper trembling in my hands. Then I folded it neatly, and I knew the bank wasn't just closing. It was time for the truth to come into the open. I didn't confront them right away. That might surprise you. Most people imagine betrayal as something that demands immediate action, raised voices, slammed doors, dramatic ultimatums. But shock has a way of slowing time. It makes you careful. It makes you quiet. I needed to understand the shape of what I was holding before I named it out loud. The next morning, I put the letter back in its envelope and slid it into my bag. I went about my day as if nothing had changed. I watered the plants, I folded a load of towels, I even answered a text from my daughter about a recipe she couldn't remember, like we were still standing on solid ground. Inside, though, something had shifted. I drove to the bank just after lunch. The building was cool and smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and paper. I sat across from a woman named Denise, who wore thin glasses and spoke in a voice that suggested she'd learned how to deliver difficult information gently. She pulled up the account, confirmed what I already suspected. "Yes," she said, tapping the screen. "Your address was used, but you are not listed as an account holder. However, several transfers came from an account in your name." I nodded. "Without my authorization?" "Yes," she said again, softer this time. I thanked her. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I asked what steps I could take to protect myself moving forward. She walked me through them patiently, sliding papers across the desk, waiting while I signed. When I left the bank, the sun felt too bright. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left. I thought of my daughter as a child, counting coins at the kitchen table, tongue sticking out in concentration. I thought of how proud I'd been when she opened her first account, how carefully I'd taught her about trust. That night, I called a family meeting. I asked them to come over the next evening, no explanation, just a request. My son hesitated. My daughter asked if it was necessary. I said yes. They arrived separately, tension already thick in the air. I had set the table neatly, no food, just water glasses. The bank letter sat in front of me, folded once. We exchanged small talk that went nowhere. Finally, I placed my hands on the table. "I need to talk about something," I said. My daughter leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. My son stared at his phone, then put it face down when I didn't continue right away. "I went to the bank yesterday," I said. My daughter's eyes flicked to the envelope, just for a second, but I saw it. "I found an account, one opened using my address, with transfers from my funds." Silence settled over the table, heavy and unavoidable. "That was just temporary," my daughter said quickly. Too quickly. "I was going to tell you." "When?" I asked. She hesitated. My son looked up then, confusion etched across his face. "What account?" My daughter shot him a look. "It's not a big deal." "It is to me," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried. Because it wasn't discussed, and because it assumes something I never agreed to. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Mom, you're overreacting. We've been under a lot of stress." "I know stress," I said. "I've been carrying it for years, quietly." My son frowned. "Wait, you're saying money was taken?" "Transferred," I said, without my consent. He turned to his sister. Is that true? She looked away. That was answer enough. The room felt smaller then, like the walls were listening. I want you to hear me carefully, I said. This isn't about punishment, it's about boundaries. My daughter laughed, sharp and bitter. Boundaries? Now? Yes, I said, now. I slid the envelope toward them. I've closed access to my accounts, I've removed automatic payments, I've also updated my will. That got their attention. My son sat up straighter. Updated how? I've put everything on hold until trust is rebuilt. My daughter's face flushed. You can't do that. I can, and I have. She stood abruptly. So that's it? You're cutting us off? I'm stepping back, I replied. There's a difference. You're choosing money over family, she snapped. I met her gaze. I'm choosing myself, I said, for the first time in a long time. The argument that followed wasn't loud. That was the hardest part. It was controlled, clipped, filled with accusations disguised as concern. You've changed. This isn't like you. You're being selfish. Each word landed, but none of them moved me, because underneath them, I heard the truth. We didn't think you'd ever stop. Eventually, they left. My son looked back once, something uncertain in his eyes. My daughter didn't. When the door closed, I stood in the quiet and listened to my own breathing. It was uneven, but it was mine. The next morning, the consequences began. Calls from relatives, questions wrapped in politeness. We heard you're having some trouble with the kids. My daughter had talked, framed the story carefully. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I simply said, I'm taking care of some things. And for the first time, that was true. The bank was closed. But what would happen when everyone else found out? I underestimated how quickly a story can change once it leaves your mouth and enters someone else's. Within days, the phone calls started. Not from my children, but from people who had watched me raise them, sisters, cousins, old friends from church who still remembered the casseroles I brought when their husbands died, the rides I gave when their cars broke down. They all began the same way. I hope you don't mind me asking. I did mind, but I let them speak. Some were gentle, genuinely concerned. Others came with an edge, a verdict already formed. I listened as they told me, kindly, of course, that my children were struggling, that times were hard, that family helps family, that I had always been so generous. Yes, I said, again and again, I have. What I didn't say was how generosity, when taken for granted, turns into something hollow, how it starts to feel less like love and more like obligation. The truth became public not because I announced it, but because my absence created a vacuum. Bills went unpaid, rent fell behind, excuses thinned out. Without my quiet intervention smoothing things over, consequences arrived right on time. My son showed up to my door one evening, unannounced, rain dripping from his jacket onto the mat I'd scrubbed clean that morning. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Not the tired of inconvenience, but the tired of reality pressing in. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside. He stood in the living room, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the familiar space like it might comfort him. You didn't realize how much you were covering, he said finally. I sat down across from him. I didn't either, I replied, not until I stopped. He swallowed. My credit's worse than I thought, and rent's due again. I know. He looked up, frustration flickering. So what am I supposed to do? The question hung there, heavy, not can you help me, but what am I supposed to do, as if I still held the answer. You figure it out, I said softly, the way adults do. His jaw tightened. That's cold. No, I said, it's honest. He stood abruptly. You raised us to believe family would always be there. I am here, I said, just not in the way you're used to. He left angry, hurt. I let him go. A week later, my daughter's situation unraveled publicly. Her landlord filed a notice, Her husband's parents, who had always assumed I was the safety net, declined to step in. At a family gathering I wasn't invited to, someone asked, loudly, why her mother wasn't helping. Silence followed. Uncomfortable. Exposing. That's when the narrative cracked. People began to ask questions, real ones, about the money, about the years of support, about why grown adults had relied so heavily on one person without giving much back. I didn't gloat. I didn't correct the record. I let the truth stand on its own, quiet and firm. One afternoon, my daughter called. Her voice was different now, lower, stripped of performance. I didn't think you'd really do it, she said. I know, I replied. There was a long pause. We're struggling, she admitted. I believe you, but struggling doesn't give you the right to take. She sighed. I didn't think it would hurt you. That sentence landed deeper than all the others. I think, I said carefully, you didn't think about me at all. She didn't argue. The public consequence wasn't humiliation, it was clarity. The illusion that my children were independent cracked, and with it, the assumption that I was endlessly available to absorb the cost. Some relatives apologized quietly. Others stayed distant. I accepted both. What surprised me most was the stillness that followed. My phone stopped buzzing. My calendar emptied. Evenings stretched long and quiet. And in that quiet, something unexpected happened. I felt lighter. Not because I'd won, not because anyone had suffered, but because for the first time in decades, my resources, emotional, financial, and physical, belonged to me again. I started saying yes to myself. I fixed the porch light I'd been meaning to replace. I booked a long overdue medical appointment. I joined a small book club at the library where no one knew my history, only my name. I missed my children, of course I did. Love doesn't disappear just because boundaries appear. But love, I was learning, can survive distance. What it cannot survive is erasure. And slowly, painfully, honestly, the rebuilding began. Healing doesn't arrive like forgiveness in the movies. There was no single morning where I woke up whole, no sudden warmth flooding my chest, no dramatic apology waiting on my doorstep. Healing came in fragments, small, unremarkable moments that stitched themselves together slowly, like mending done by hand. The first sign was how quiet my body felt. Not the house. The house was still the same. Old floors creaking, pipes knocking in the walls, the familiar sigh of the refrigerator at night. But inside me, something had unclenched. I noticed it one afternoon while sitting on the porch with a cup of tea. My shoulders weren't raised toward my ears. My jaw wasn't tight. I was just sitting. For years, I had lived in a state of readiness, ready to help, ready to fix, ready to cover what someone else couldn't. That constant vigilance had taken more from me than money ever did. Without it, I had space. I started walking in the mornings. Nothing ambitious, just around the block at first. I noticed things I'd rushed past for years. The old magnolia tree 2 houses down, still blooming stubbornly despite its age. The neighbor's dog who barked at everything except me. The way sunlight pooled on the sidewalk like it had nowhere else to be. One morning, I ran into Mrs. Alvarez from the book club. She smiled and asked how I was doing. I'm learning, I said, and I meant it. The relationship with my children didn't heal quickly or neatly. Weeks passed with little contact. Then one evening, my son called, not with a problem, not with a request, but with an update. I got a second job, he said. That's good, I replied. There was a pause. I didn't realize how much I leaned on you. I waited, let him finish. I'm sorry, he added. The words were awkward, like shoes not quite broken in, but they were there. Thank you, I said. I didn't rush to comfort him. I didn't dilute it. I let the apology stand on its own. My daughter took longer. When she finally came over, months later, she stood in the doorway the way she used to as a teenager, unsure, guarded, pride battling fear. She didn't sit right away, just looked around, as if seeing the house clearly for the first time. I didn't lose everything, but I lost some friends and some illusions. I nodded. That can be painful. She swallowed. I was angry at you because it was easier than being ashamed. That honesty cost her something. I could see it. I should have asked, she continued, not assumed, and I should never have touched money that wasn't mine. No, I agreed. You shouldn't have. She looked at me then, really looked, eyes wet but steady. I don't expect things to go back to how they were. I don't want them to, I said gently. I want them to go forward, healthier. She sat down. We didn't hug that day. We talked, slowly, carefully, about expectations, about adulthood, about the difference between support and dependence. It wasn't warm, but it was real, and real was enough. Over time, new rhythms formed. We met for coffee instead of meals I paid for. Conversations shifted. They asked how I was and waited for the answer. I noticed when they paid their own way without comment, when they solved problems without calling me first. It hurt sometimes. Not being needed can ache in its own way. But being respected, that healed something deep. I forgave them, not because they earned it perfectly, but because carrying resentment felt like reopening an account I had already closed. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to relive the injury every day. I also forgave myself for confusing sacrifice with love, for believing that being indispensable was the same as being valued, for teaching my children, unintentionally, that my limits didn't matter. That lesson was costly, but it wasn't wasted. One afternoon, I revisited my will. This time, I didn't do it out of fear or obligation. I did it with clarity. I wrote notes, conditions, intentions, not as punishment, but as guidance, a final act of parenting rooted in wisdom, not rescue. I felt at peace signing it. Life didn't become perfect. It became honest. There were still moments of sadness, still memories that caught me off guard. Sunday dinners, noisy kitchens, the old version of myself moving through the house with purpose stitched to her apron. But there were new joys, too. Quiet mornings, unspent money that went toward experiences instead of emergencies, a sense of self that no longer dissolved when someone needed something. I had closed the bank, but I had kept my heart, stronger now because it finally belonged to me as well. And that, I realized, was the inheritance that mattered most. There's a moment in every long life when you're forced to ask yourself a hard question, not about love, but about cost. Not the kind you can calculate on a receipt or track in a bank statement, but the quiet cost of disappearing little by little for the sake of peace, of calling it generosity when it's really fear of being left behind, of believing that if you stay useful long enough, you'll stay loved. For a long time, I thought being needed was proof that I mattered. I thought a full refrigerator, a paid bill, a solved crisis meant I was doing motherhood right. What I didn't see, what I couldn't see, was how easily love turns brittle when it's never allowed to say no. Closing the bank didn't make me cruel. It made me visible. It showed my children something I should have taught them sooner, that support is a gift, not a guarantee, that adulthood begins where entitlement ends, and that respect can't grow in soil watered only by sacrifice. I didn't lose my children. I found myself. And in the quiet that followed, something surprising happened. Love returned, different, humbler, more honest, no longer propped up by transactions, no longer confused with obligation. If you're listening to this and feeling that tightness in your chest, the one that comes from giving and still feeling unseen, I want you to know this. Setting a boundary does not make you heartless. It makes you whole. So I'll leave you with this question, the one that stayed with me long after the house went quiet. If you stopped being useful tomorrow, would the people in your life still know how to love you? If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing or supporting the channel so more stories like this can find the people who need them. Sometimes the bravest thing a parent can do is finally calls the bank.